Welcome to a very special episode of RX Report, where you get your health and your news delivered. I'm your host, Manuel, and we've got a very special guest here with us today, Doug Kuhn. He is our Director of Congressional Affairs on the Legislative Government Affairs team here at APhA, and he's here to talk a little bit about the ongoing legislative efforts in government and for pharmacy. So, Doug, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Mason. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Yeah, no, I'm really excited to have you because I keep talking about the different things happening in the pharmacy world, both like in the legislative world, but also just the medical expertise. But I am really curious about your take on a lot of what's happening. So let's talk a little bit about your qualifications here. Tell me a little bit about your background and your role with the government affairs team.
Sure. So as you mentioned before, my title, of course, is Director of Congressional Affairs. And basically what that means is I'm APHA's in-house federal lobbyist. So, I handle a lot of different matters, obviously regarding legislation, lobbying, and advocacy, and that sort of thing.
And for those who aren't aware, give me a 3-year-old definition of what lobbying is for people like myself.
So, at the end of the day, basically what it is I go before members of Congress and their staff to advocate on behalf of pharmacy issues on behalf of APhA. And it's basically just kind of educating folks, letting them know about our positions, our policies, our stances on a lot of different issues, and basically just kind of advocating on behalf of the profession.
And how long have you been doing that, advocating for the profession?
So for the pharmacy profession, I've been here for a little under 3 years. Prior to joining APhA, I worked for ASHP for about 3 years. So I've been in the pharmacy space for, I'd say, a little under 6 years advocating.
Okay, so you're an old hat at this by now. You know the ins and outs, the tips and tricks. You've been involved with the profession for quite some time, it sounds like.
Yes. I've been involved in the healthcare space for quite a while, even prior to working in the pharmacy space. Prior to working at APhA and ASHP, I lobbied on behalf of the radiologists and the oncologists for about a dozen years. So I'm familiar with the healthcare space and a lot of the players that are involved in it.
So again, for the layman like me, kind of give me a basic idea of what the government affairs team does. How does it add value to the profession of pharmacy and APhA as a whole?
Sure. So, I don't know if you're familiar with the department as a whole, but of course, we're broken up into different segments. Some of my colleagues work on the regulatory side. I work on the legislative side. And of course, those two things kind of go hand in hand in regards to interacting with each other. What I do specifically has to do with federal legislation, as opposed to, someone on the regulatory side that deals with things such as drug issues with FDA or with CMS. But again, we work together as a team. And so, one of my colleagues likes to say that we are a small but mighty team, and I think it works pretty well. There are a lot of things that overlap within the department, but at the end of the day, our goal is basically to advocate on behalf of APhA and advocate on behalf of pharmacy and pharmacists across the country.
So the profession of pharmacy comes to you and says, we need this change implemented in the U.S. government, and then APhA works with you to find the best ways to, like you said, lobby and advocate for the profession on the Hill itself.
Correct.
Okay, that sounds like a big job. That sounds like a lot of pressure. But I'm really curious because Washington it seems like there's a breaking news story every other hour right now coming out of Washington. So I'm curious, what challenges do you face now with your profession? What are some of the key issues that you're working on or even tracking with pharmacy right now?
It's a good question. And, this is something that we speak to quite often. And, one of the things I like to say to our membership and our leadership when they ask us about, what we advocate on, how we decide what we advocate on, and how we go about that. It's a simple process, but it could be pretty complicated. And one of the reasons for a lot of this complications is based on the politics. And as you can probably guess, politics plays a huge part fairly often. And what I like to say to folks is a lot of times the politics always gets in the way of the policy when it comes to certain things.
Sure. Yeah.
And so, there are certain obstacles and certain challenges with that. So I can give an example is obviously one of the things that we've been working on for quite some time now is trying to obtain provider status for pharmacists. And, we've done that through certain pieces of legislation going back 10, 12 plus years. And most recently, of course, with the ECAPS piece of legislation, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And I'm sure a lot of
We've heard about it. Yeah. Kind of explain what being classified as a provider would mean for a pharmacist.
So basically, CMS basically has something called the physician fee schedule, and they basically provide for Part B reimbursement for what they consider to be Part B providers under Medicare. And so one of the things that we've been looking at for quite some time now is to basically be part of that pool.
To justify them being covered by Medicare.
under Medicare Part B.
Part B, okay.
And, and there's a lot of nuances to that, and as you can probably guess, there's a lot of politics even involved with that, because at the end of the day, and I can say this coming from the physician side, is that it's a very small pool of money, relatively speaking. And of course, we're talking billions, but it's a relatively small pool of money that other providers are working with. And just to be truthful, they're not too keen on having to share that pool of money with other folks. And so we run into some obstacles, when it comes to things like that, from folks within other physician organizations, from, broader organizations such as the AMA, and even sometimes we receive some resistance on the Hill, just because folks aren't necessarily as keen as we'd like them to be. And
sure, like different motivations for different people might not necessarily line up with yours.
Exactly, and so that's one of the challenges. But there's a number of issues that we work on. Everything from speaking about drug shortages to PBM reform, and again to provider status. And so it just depends on the climate in Congress, that particular day, that particular week. But there are a number of issues that we are faced with and that we address on a day-to-day basis.
So you're right. There are so many issues that are affecting the profession right now. And like you were saying earlier, there is a very small but mighty team working for this whole dictionary's worth of issues that need to be solved on the Hill. So I imagine that you will probably take any help you can get. And I'm curious to the people watching this show from APhA membership, how could they get involved? Like, how could they help achieve these goals that you're trying to make happen on Washington?
It's a good question. And there's a number of ways. I mean, I think the most immediate way is to get actually involved by joining the committee. For example, in our department, we have two major committees. The first of which is the Government Affairs Committee. The second of which is the Political Action Committee, and they basically kind of work hand in hand.
And any member can join those?
Yes. So you can basically apply. I believe it's in late summer, and then you basically receive notification sometime in early fall whether or not your application was accepted, and so you can be part of that committee. These committees, I know we're doing a little bit of restructuring right now, but for the most part, these committees involve 2-year terms. And then again, you can get actively involved. One of the things that we do on an annual basis in the Government Affairs Committee, as an example, is we come up with the priorities for the year, for the legislative and the policy priorities. And so I know a lot of folks, may say things like, what's the point of joining an association, because you kind of benefit from what we do anyway.
But right. This is how you make the change happen yourself.
And so I would push back on that a little bit, because one of the ways I think that you do have a direct hand is if you're part of that Government Affairs Committee, you can actually dictate, what it is we speak to. You can kind of dictate exactly what our priorities are. So I think that's one really hands-on approach to basically getting involved.
And I guess being involved with these committees, like we were saying earlier, there are so many issues that need to be dealt with that if you're involved with this committee, you can kind of make the prioritization where you best see fit. Versus if you're just a bystander, you can't really have a say in what's happening and where.
Exactly.
So it seems like a pretty good deal to be involved with you and actually make that change happen, the change that you want to see.
Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, that's the thing. Is, for example, if you're a pharmacist and your big priority is dealing with drug shortages, if you're not on the committee and it doesn't come up as one of the priorities, then it might not actually be something that we advocate for.
Right, it's on the list, but it's not necessarily what you're working on right now.
I mean, and then again, that's one way you have some direct impact. Another way you can have an impact, of course, is getting involved on the grassroots level. So, as an example, I'll just go back to ECAPS. When ECAPS is introduced, you can help out by writing your member of Congress, by calling them, or even meeting them in person, and basically just kind of helping us convey the message that we're hoping to convey. And obviously, what we do as a department is we kind of walk you through that. So it's not like you're starting from scratch and having to come up with the talking points or the messaging yourself. And so.
That makes sense, yeah.
And so, I mean, that's another, and it's been pretty effective. We keep track of how many letters that we send to members of Congress and their impact, as a result of that.
You see the ROI of the letters that you send, you see how many responses or actual actions been taken there?
Yeah, we can see that, for example, with PBM reform last year, I think we had over 5,000 folks write in, and I could actually see that as a lobbyist when I go in to meet with various members of Congress and their offices to see what that impact might be.
You just see a giant office. I'm picturing a giant office of letters, kind of like Harry Potter, where they're flying through the chimney, and it's just more PBM reform. We gotta have.
I mean, that's the whole thing. Is they notice. I mean, that's the one thing that I'm sure you're aware of is if you have 100 folks writing into a district or even 1,000 folks writing into a certain state. They keep track of that stuff, and it's something.
Yeah, it shows like there's want behind that, like shows from their constituents that there is a desire for change.
Exactly, and that's the way that they can actually quantify how important a certain issue is for their constituency, and that helps out a lot. So again, when we come out and we have our members write 5,000, 6,000 letters of support, I think that's something that's really impactful and it really shows.
I'm just picturing like a Santa Claus type figure with a giant sack delivering a 5,000 letters saying, hey, you need to fix this, and here's 5,000 people telling you why.
Exactly.
So you've been working pretty heavily with the Hill and with members to try to get this change passed. I'm really curious on your thoughts. What is going to happen like the next 6 months, do you think, on the Hill for pharmacy? Like, will anything change? Do you see any change forecasted?
That's a good question, and this kind of gets back to what I mentioned to you earlier of politics sometimes getting in the way of the policy, because with a lot of the issues that we speak to and a lot of the issues that we advocate on, if you're sitting down with a member of Congress or their staff, there's no way that they can argue that it doesn't make any sense. But unfortunately, there are times where certain obstacles kind of get in the way. So a real life example of this is what we're living through right now is the whole reconciliation process that I'm sure you've heard.
Right.
There are certain pieces of legislation that we were looking to see included in reconciliation, and I mean we're in late May right now. Unfortunately, for the most part, at the beginning of this year, every single piece of healthcare legislation was kind of put on hold until Congress can figure out exactly what they want to do with reconciliation. So there have been bills that have been introduced, for example, but there hasn't necessarily been actual concrete, tangible steps to move those bills forward. So I think that now that the reconciliation process is kind of winding down, we can start to take a closer look at some of the healthcare issues that we're trying to advocate on. Obviously, including ECAPs, including PBM reform, drug shortages, as I mentioned to you before, drug pricing. There's a lot of issues that are on the table, and I think that depending on the issue, I think that we're going to see a lot of traction with PBM reform, and this is something, as you may know, has received a lot of both bipartisan and bicameral support. I mean, everybody
on
effort. And again, I mean, it's always in the news, and I think everybody is under the agreement that we need some type of PBM reform.
It's just like, how do we want the change to actually happen?
It's just like, again, it's just little nuances here and there. I mean, something as simple as a minor modification that the House has and the Senate doesn't agree with. But I think ultimately, that's probably one of the first things that you'll see accomplished towards the end of the year is at least some type of comprehensive PBM reform.
Right, and we know the administration just put out an executive order saying like there needs to be a big overhaul in the way PBMs are activated or the way that they work. There wasn't a whole lot of detail there, but you're hoping, it sounds like, that you can kind of guide that order to basically lead to where it helps both pharmacists and patients, I hope.
Exactly. And again, I don't think it's a tough sell. I think it's something that everybody is on board with. It's just a matter of getting it done. And so we do what we can from our position at APhA, and we have our meetings on the Hill with folks on both the House side and the Senate side. We meet with patient groups to sometimes bring them up to the Hill to advocate on that same issue as well. But that's something that we're working on. If I had to guess of all the issues that we are working on, I would say that's probably something that you're most likely to see passing laws towards the end of the year.
Well, I'm looking forward to what you and your team are achieving or going to achieve, it sounds like, in the near future. I can't wait to see the actual reform happening on the Hill. It sounds like everybody's wanting this to happen. It's just getting the actual ball rolling.
Right.
But I do think that you have a lot of potential behind you, especially with people sending in 5,000 to 6,000 letters, if not more, on these issues that are affecting people countrywide. So until next time, I'd love to see what you got going on in a few months, and maybe you kind of give us an update on where we are. But Doug Kuhn, thank you so much for being on RX Report. We loved having you.
Sure, thanks for having me.
And if you want to join the 5,000 to 6,000 people sending letters to change things in Congress for your specific needs, maybe leave RX Report a like and subscribe. Be sure to follow us on all of our APhA channels where you get your health and your news delivered. Our executive producer is Rob Hodges. Our creative producer and co-editor is Kate Erdmann. Until next time, I've been your host, Manuel. Tune in next Friday for more RX Report, and we'll see you then. Bye, y'all.